Hola, 안녕. It's me, Alia. 안녕하세요, 알리아입니다. 오늘은 여러분들께 한국어를 어떻게 배웠는지 알려드리겠습니다. 왜냐면 몇 분들이 저한테 한국어를 어떻게 배웠냐고 물어봤기 때문에 일을 하게 됐어요. 제가 2014년부터 한국어를 공부하기 시작했어요. 공부한 지 8년? 8년쯤 됐어요. 그래서 아주 오랫동안 한국어를 공부했어요. 또 뭐가 있어? 아, 맞아. 작년에 그 한국어 능력 시험을 5개월 동안 아주 열심히 준비했거든요. 그때는 6급 중에 6급은 제일 높은 급이에요. 6급 중에 제가 5급을 받았어요. 근데 제 실력이 아직도 많이 부족해요. 진짜. 제가 말할 때 아주 어색해요. 어색한다고 생각해요. 아직도 많이 배워야 돼요. 근데 사실은 제가 그 시험을 본 후에 한국어를 공부하지 않았어요. 하나도 공부하지 않았어요. 그래서 많이 까먹었어요. 엄청 많이. 아주 쉽죠. 근데 괜찮아요. 아직도 말할 수 있으니까. 걱정이 아니에요. 오케이, 지금부터 영어로 말할 거예요. Okay, so everything began in May of 2014 on my birthday, and I decided that I wanted to start learning Korean because I had been into K-pop for a couple months and I had gone to a K-pop concert a few weeks before my birthday, which was in May. So I decided, you know what, why don't I learn some Korean? This seems like it could be kind of fun. I wanted to start to understand the songs and the funny like idol shows and stuff, so that's what motivated me to start learning Korean. And the first thing I did was I learned Hangul, the Korean writing system. And I spent around 3 to 5 days just memorizing. I made my own flashcards, and I would just go through the flashcards and try to sound out words and practice writing. And so I did that for around 3 to 5 days, and then I started to learn vocabulary. Now, before I start talking about vocabulary, this actually is going to lead to my first tip, and that would be learn Hangul first. Don't waste your time trying to memorize words using romanization. Romanization really is more like a tool. It should be used to help you when you struggle pronouncing a word in Hangul, but I do not recommend trying to learn Korean with romanization alone. It's just going to set you back because it contradicts itself and it can be a bit confusing. Okay, so after I learned Hangul, I started to learn Korean vocabulary. And the way I did this was I just looked up how to learn Korean on Google, and one of the websites it took me to was Howtostudykorean.com. And so on there they had like a lot of different grammar lessons. I didn't really understand what was going on, so I just decided to look at their vocabulary lists. And what's really nice about their website is that with each unit they have like these very long vocab lists, and they have Memrise decks for that. So Memrise is a online like flashcard system, and I found that it was very helpful with me learning new words because it was just repetition, spaced repetition. And so I found that to be very helpful because that was like my first time being exposed to Korean vocabulary, and repetition is key. This leads to my second tip, and that would be before you start really getting into the Korean language, I would recommend learning some basic vocabulary first. It will help you in the long run for sure once you start learning some basic words, because once you learn the beginner grammar, you'll be able to use those vocabulary words in your sentences. And it'll make your life a lot easier if you know words to create sentences versus understanding grammar and having no words to go with it. I would just say you can either look up vocabulary lists online, or if you're perhaps taking Korean classes, just look at the vocabulary at the end of each unit and try and memorize them, or at least familiarize yourself with those words, because once you get to the actual grammar part of your book, you'll find that you'll be able to get through it a lot more easily if you already know the words in advance. Another thing I would recommend is to make a vocabulary notebook. Now, I did not do this until like 2016, and I wish I had done it sooner, because you'll find that it's actually better to have a notebook dedicated to your vocabulary so you can just go and look up a word if you don't remember, versus putting all of your vocabulary and all of your grammar in the same notebook. It can get pretty messy and sloppy at times, so I think it's really nice to have a separate notebook dedicated to vocabulary. So I spent about a month learning vocabulary, just practicing those language decks. And then eventually I just kind of started to go on Instagram and follow Korean accounts, Korean language accounts. With the Instagram thing, I kind of just did that for a couple of months. I would just look at their lessons and I would write them down. You can see some of the words I learned, and these are just some words I picked up from Instagram. So now if we fast forward to like around December of 2014, I got my first Korean textbook. I just got it off of Amazon. It was called Korean Made Easy for Beginners. I liked the book, and I remember I would just go through it every once in a while, maybe once a week or every couple weeks, just for fun. So now we fast forward to 2015, around maybe March. This was when I started going to like Korean markets and stuff with my mom. We went to H Mart, and surrounding H Mart there are actually several Korean businesses, and so one of them was a Korean bookstore. And so I remember I went in and I asked like, oh, could you show me some books for people who want to learn Korean? And they were like, okay, let's recommend you this book. So this is from Korea University. This is, I believe, a conversation book. It's really old, for sure. I don't think they distribute this book anymore, but I do know it helped me out a lot. So here you can see the inside of the book. It just has like one particular grammatical structure, and then there'd be vocabulary. I like this book a lot. I felt like it explained things well, and what was nice is it also has pictures in it, and so I would just use this every once in a while. I wasn't super consistent, but I did find that it helped me with my Korean. Okay, so this leads to my third tip, and that would be find a series or a textbook and stick with it, at least in the beginning. I find that by me using different resources in the beginning, it kind of set me back because I didn't have structure. And I think it's very advantageous to have a good structure in the beginning at least, and work your way up to becoming more flexible once your skill level increases. Now we're gonna fast forward to spring of 2015, so about 1 year into my studies. I came across TalkToMeinKorean.com, and that is what changed everything for me. What I did was I went online. Every day I would learn a new grammar point. Every day. At least for the entire summer, that's what I did. And what I think really helped me out with my Korean skills was the fact that Talk to Me in Korean has podcasts that go with each grammar lesson, and they also have PDF files. So I would copy the PDFs, at least like some key points from it and some of its sample sentences, and I would listen to these podcasts, and they would be around, I think, 10 to 20 minutes max. They weren't super long. So I did this every single day, and that entire summer my Korean skills really increased, and it was because I was exposing myself to so much Korean, and obviously I was on a very consistent studying schedule as well. And I continued to use Talk to Me in Korean for many years. And this leads to my fourth tip, and that would be try to listen to Korean as much as possible. Now, I wasn't really aware of this when I was younger, but looking back at it, the fact that I exposed myself to so much Korean is the reason why when I speak, I sound so natural. Now, of course, I'm not perfect when I speak Korean, but I have been told by Koreans themselves, like, oh, you sound like a Korean, or wow, you sound very natural when you speak in Korean. And it's because I had this constant input of Korean. And that's really important for any language, but especially for beginners. You'll find that once you continuously listen to a language, you'll start to sound like them. And some ways you could do this would be by listening to Korean music, you know, K-pop, K-rap, indie artists, watching Korean dramas. If you don't like dramas, maybe movies. If you're not into that, then maybe watch some variety shows, documentaries, anything. It's just very important to listen to things that are in Korean. Around this time, I also started looking at language exchange websites and apps. So HelloTalk, My Language Exchange, ConversationExchange.com, all of these different websites I used. And I did come across a couple different Korean people who I actually spoke to in the long run, and that did definitely help me out with my Korean skills as well. This leads to my fifth point, and that would be try to speak to Koreans. Now I know it can be pretty scary and stressful to talk to people in their language when you're a language learner. But the truth is, most people are willing to help you and they want to help you sound more natural. And on top of that, you will learn so much faster by having actual conversations with people than just watching something or reading a book. Now, with that being said, some people really don't want to use language exchange apps, and that's perfectly fine. I understand why. There are some weirdos out there, okay? So I get it. But if you don't want to do that, then I would say practice speaking Korean by yourself. It could seem weird at first, but you'd be surprised. If you narrate your day and you just talk to yourself in Korean, you'll naturally start to speak Korean better. Fast forward to 2017, so that is 3 years into my Korean studies. I officially finished my first Korean notebook. This was my grammar notebook. This was my last lesson in here. It was from Talk to Me in Korean. It was about passive voice. And I remember feeling really proud of myself because that was 3 years of studying all in this notebook here. Towards the end of 2017, I decided to buy my first ebook, and it was a Talk to Me in Korean ebook. It was the IYAGI for Beginners ebook. I really think helped up my Korean comprehension skills because the entire thing is just like a long conversation, and then it has the vocabulary separate and it has audio that goes along with it. And so I wrote down the entire thing. So each chapter I would write down the entire conversation, and then I would highlight words that I perhaps didn't feel comfortable with. And so this definitely helped me out with both my listening and my speaking skills because I would read out these dialogues. And sometimes I would even read them out to my language exchange partners as well. So we're gonna time travel again to now 2018 spring. So that is now 4 years of me studying Korean. And I went to a half-price bookstore and I came across this book. This book changed everything for me. That sounds really dramatic, but the reason why is because I was at this kind of a plateau where I felt like the Talk to Me in Korean stuff was helping me, and so was like having the online exchange language partners, but I felt like I just was missing something and I just didn't know what it was, and this book is what it was. Unfortunately, they no longer distribute this version of the book. If you do find it, it's going to be used like I did. I found it by chance, and this is the level 3A. I got super lucky because this was my exact level. This was exactly what I needed at that time, which is an intermediate level book, but it's like the very low end of intermediate. And so the reason why I love this book is because it comes with a CD, it comes with like workbook questions, and then it has dialogue and reading. What I would do was I would first go to the back of each chapter. As you can see here, I would look at the vocabulary. There is a dictionary at the end of the book as well that translates everything. And then I would go back to the beginning of the chapter, and after learning the vocabulary, I would listen to the dialogues. There's always 2. So there was also like a long dialogue section. So I would listen to it one time, and then the second time I would listen to it and read along right here, which was really nice. I like that they wrote out the entire conversation. Then I would do one of the reading portions. So here, this is like a long letter that was written, and I would just try practicing reading it out loud. I would try to answer the questions that correlated with the dialogue or the reading sections. Basically, like, this book really pushed me because it was challenging to the point to where I definitely felt like I had to take it little steps at a time. At the same time, it wasn't so difficult that I couldn't understand it. And so from 2018 on, this book is really just the primary book that I use. And I didn't actually finish it till last year, believe it or not. If anybody really did want this book series, they have a newer version. However, it's sold in 2 separate books. I believe there's like a student workbook or handbook, and then there's the grammar textbook. So it's almost identical to this as well. However, from my understanding, it's really meant for Sogang University. If we now go to 2019, I was going to university and I wanted to take Korean classes, right? But the thing is, I took the placement test and my score was so high that I actually placed out of the Korean classes, and they told me I couldn't take any classes at my university. But what's really cool about me placing out was the following year in 2020, I actually applied to be a Korean teaching aide, and I ended up landing the job. If I could do it, so can you. Anybody can learn any language, you just have to put in the time and effort for it. And you know, those tips I mentioned earlier about, you know, exposing yourself to the language, having all that input, learning Hangul, taking time to learn vocabulary first, then trying to learn grammar, speaking with Korean people if you can't, then speaking to yourself. There are just so many ways that you can up your skills in Korean, and this goes for pretty much any language, not just Korean. I speak Spanish as well. Actually, my degree is in Spanish. It's ironic. You know, everyone has plateaus. It's been 8 years for me. I had my ups and downs. There were times where I felt very discouraged. There were times where I felt like, oh man, I'm really not good at Korean. Like, oh, I wish I could do this and that, because I would watch other people who were like really good at Korean. I'm like, man, I just wish I could be like them one day. And I guess I kind of have become that to some other people. It's crazy, to be honest. It's like you never really realize it until somebody else tells you. Thank you for watching this video. I hope this answered any other questions that some people had from my previous video about how I got TOEIC level 5. If you have more questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. I might make more Korean related videos if people request it. I hope this could help somebody. 봐주셔서 감사합니다. 다음에 봐요. Bye everyone. See you in the next one.